Welcome to a new episode of Cheaters Always Cheat. Like, subscribe, and share to stay connected.
My story is pretty long, and it's honestly a tragic one. I wouldn't want anyone to experience the things I've been through, not even those I wanted revenge on. I'll have to share some things about myself that I'm not proud of, and would rather keep to myself. When I was 19, my dad got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It was a tough time for us because my mom had to work long hours, 9 to 9, and I ended up taking care of him. He fought hard for 4 years, but unfortunately, he didn't make it after a triple bypass surgery. Losing my dad had a huge impact on my mom, and I tried to be strong for both of us. Those were really dark times, and they changed me completely. I couldn't focus on school, and my grades suffered. I had to get an after-school job to support my mom, who was a wreck after losing my dad. Something inside me changed during all this. Before all this happened, I led a somewhat sheltered life because I regularly attended church and church activities. But when my dad passed away, everything changed. If I wanted to go to college, I had to figure out a way to pay for it myself. The situation at home and the constant need for extra money meant I couldn't qualify for any loans. The job I had paid minimum wage, and it barely got us anywhere financially. During this difficult time, a friend introduced me to pills, which made things even more complicated. He said that if I needed some extra cash, I could work with him and his buddies. They were involved in selling pills, and eventually, I started delivering coke for them. After a few months of doing this, I managed to save enough money. I used that money to get through high school and pay for my college. I spent a few years in college, and during that time, I didn't show off or waste money to impress anyone. I kept a low profile and finished my bachelor's degree in 3 years because I had plenty of free time. At first, I wanted to become a lawyer, but I knew too many corrupt cops and officials who were pushing pills. I studied law, but I didn't plan on passing the bar because I decided to become a paralegal instead. In college, I reconnected with a high school classmate named Rita. We were close back in high school, and as it turned out, we had crushes on each other, but were too shy to admit it at the time. Long story short, Rita and I became best friends and eventually fell deeply in love. We were making plans for our future together. Both of us had been in failed relationships before. Mine, especially, had left me feeling emotionally numb, like I couldn't love again. It had been years since I deliberately dated anyone. My ex, let's call her Becky, did some heartless things that led to our breakup. I treated her well, helping her escape an insulting relationship and never being cruel to her. I taught her that no one deserves to be used, but she left me feeling shattered and devastated. Then I met Rita, and she brought hope back into my life. It made me realize that all my past relationships had let me down. Rita was the love of my life, and I knew we were meant to be together. We took things slow at first, but as 2 years passed, I opened up more and more to her. I shared with her what had happened with Becky and everything about my dad and more. Rita showed so much understanding and empathy. We started sleeping together and eventually became a couple. She appreciated that I truly listened, spoke honestly, and looked out for her. I said I loved her, and she said it back. There were some things from my past that I never told her, like how I paid for college and the things I experienced. I was scared it might ruin things between us. Despite that, we loved each other and had plans to start a family. Then, a few months later, a terrible disaster struck. My mom had a horrible accident. A large shelving unit fell on her, leaving her badly injured. The neighbors rushed her to the hospital, where they discovered she had a leaking heart valve along with many other injuries and broken bones. They did some tests to check if they could fix the valve, and a week later, we received good news that they could replace it. Unfortunately, they also found some bad news during the tests. They discovered 5 small masses around her left kidney, and the chances were high that they were tumors and cancerous. They did a biopsy, which confirmed that she had renal kidney cancer. She started treatment, and I knew I had to be there for my mother. Things were going well with Rita. We had moved in together to a town about 30 miles away from my mom's place. When I told Rita about my mother's condition, she showed concern and support. I was worried that this situation might affect our relationship, but she assured me that she didn't want to put things on hold. She said she would be there for me, offering emotional support. I told her that if she ever needed a break or felt interested in someone else, she should tell me, and I would understand. But she assured me that she valued me and that no one could replace me. As my mom started chemo, things seemed to be going okay at first, without severe side effects. However, after about 2 months, she began experiencing weakness and a loss of appetite. Throughout this time, I kept in touch with Rita through calls and texts multiple times a day. Every single day, she would message me, asking about my mom as soon as she woke up in the morning. We often spent hours talking and sharing how much we missed each other before falling asleep. We could see each other and spend the night together about every 2 weeks, and during those times, everything felt great. But my mom's condition got worse, so I told Rita she could go out with her friends and enjoy life. As summer started, the new Rita loved going to outdoor activities, even when I couldn't join her due to my mom's health. I enjoyed hearing about the fun things she did with her friends, and I was happy that she didn't isolate herself because of what I was going through. Rita always showed concern and sadness whenever I updated her about my mom's situation. The chemo was working to remove the cancer cells, but my mom was getting weaker and weaker. I realized that it wasn't the cancer destroying her anymore, it was the medicine. I knew I needed a break, so some of my mom's friends came to keep her company, giving me a bit of free time for myself. I called Rita and let her know I was on my way to her town. She told me where to find her and her friends. When I arrived, I saw most of her friends, whom I had already met before. As I made my way through the house to the back deck, I noticed a guy sitting close to Rita. They were both laughing and having a good time with their other friends. Rita introduced me to this guy named Henry as her boyfriend. He gave me a strong handshake and said he was happy to meet me. I was polite to him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. Maybe it's because of my past criminal activities that I've become more attuned to sensing suspicious people. It takes one to know one, they say. My gut told me there was something shady about Henry. He was new to their friend group, and none of them, including Rita, had known him for more than a couple of months. Just to be clear, I wasn't feeling jealous at that moment, as I realize now. Rita had other male friends, and I genuinely liked them all. It was just that there was something about Henry that didn't sit right with me. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe it was just my own jealousy talking. So I engaged in conversations with Rita and her friends, trying to distract myself and ease my mind. I observed Henry from a distance and interacted with him in a friendly manner. That night, Rita and I stayed at her place before I had to head home. Over the next few weeks, my mom's condition kept getting worse, but Rita and I continued to talk and text each other every day. Looking back, I now realize that I was the one initiating most of our communication, but back then, I didn't really keep track of it. One day, some relatives offered to take care of my mom to give me a break. So, I called Rita and told her I was on my way to see her. She mentioned the restaurant where she and her friends were having dinner, so I headed there. As I pulled into a parking spot, I saw Henry getting into a black Buick, but he didn't notice me because he wasn't familiar with my car. Inside the restaurant, Rita and her friends greeted me warmly with hugs and words of sympathy and encouragement. We had dinner and a few drinks together before Rita and I went back to her place. Before going to bed, I casually asked Rita why Henry left before I could say hello. She had no idea and wasn't even sure if he had been at the restaurant. The place we ate at was in a strip mall with other businesses, so I thought maybe he came from one of those stores. Anyway, neither Rita nor her friends had seen him there. I stayed with Rita again that night before heading back to my place around noon the next day. Then, my mom's condition took a turn for the worse, and she became critically ill. An ambulance had to transport her to the hospital. She had pneumonia and was extremely weak from the chemo, making her susceptible to various ailments for about 3 weeks. My mom got hospitalized, and they started giving her medications through an IV, but her condition kept getting worse every day. It was really tough to see her like that. Finally, the doctors told me she had, at most, a week to live. I knew she wouldn't want to spend her last days in that gloomy hospital room, so they arranged to bring her home, where I could make her last moments as peaceful as possible. Once everything was set up, we brought my mom home. She was extremely weak, but it made her happy to be back in her own house and familiar surroundings. We both knew time was running out. Though scared, she wanted to be strong and was ready to reunite with my dad after so many years. I asked one of my mom's church friends to take care of her for a while. Then I drove to see Rita without calling first. I couldn't bring myself to call because I was too overwhelmed and crying hard seeing my mom suffer. I knew Rita would understand and comfort me when I got there. As I reached Rita's house, I noticed a black Buick parked behind her car, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on the impending loss of my dear mother. I used the key Rita had given me to enter through the kitchen, like we always did. As soon as the door opened, I heard music playing, but I didn't pay much attention to it because I didn't see anyone in the living room or on the back porch. However, as I walked down the hallway toward her bedroom, I heard noises coming from inside, and I paused. I reached for the doorknob, then stopped again. It hit me that the sounds I heard were sexual. My heart sank even further, and I quickly pulled my hand back, not wanting to be noticed. But after a moment, I mustered the courage to unlock the door and open it. There was a creak, and as I looked inside, I saw them completely naked, going at it without a care, completely unaware of my presence. Honestly, my first impulse was to charge at him and give him a good punch in the face, but I knew I had to keep out of trouble for my mom's sake and my job. So I backed away slowly, my anger boiling inside me. I left the house quietly through the back and sat in my car. The weight of everything hit me hard, and I started sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't want to be seen in that state. After about half an hour, I started the car and headed back to my mom's place. I didn't tell anyone what I had just witnessed. They all assumed my tears were solely because of my mom's situation, which of course was partly true. But the betrayal I had just seen was so hurtful and cruel that it was difficult to comprehend. I knew my mom was my top priority, especially since she was nearing the end. But I felt so betrayed by Rita. I was consumed by a rage I'd never felt before. And believe me, I've experienced plenty of anger. Part of me wanted to call her and let her know what I saw, giving her a piece of my mind. But I figured, if she didn't care enough to be faithful while my mom was on her deathbed, cursing her out wouldn't make a difference. After making sure my mom was comfortable, I tried to sleep in my old childhood room. I cried myself to sleep, woke up crying, and continued crying throughout the night. When my phone rang in the morning, I saw it was Rita calling, but I ignored it. I had to resist the urge to throw the phone against the wall in anger. I went to check on my mom, who was in a deep sleep because of the morphine they gave her. I managed to text Rita back, telling her I was really busy with my mom and would call her later. Then, I forced myself to eat and take a shower. The hospice nurses came by to check on my mom's condition. After checking her vital signs, they told me she had about 48 hours left to live. I thanked them and went out into the backyard, trying not to lose my mind with everything that had happened and was about to happen. I texted Rita, letting her know my mother's condition was about the same, but I didn't want to see her right now. I really didn't want to talk to Rita or have her show up. I felt like I owed it to my mom to make her last moments as peaceful as possible, so I focused on that the next evening. At around 6 p.m., my mom took her final breath with me holding her hand, and it was a heartbreaking moment. Over the next 3 days, I was busy with meetings with her pastor and finalizing the details for the church service and burial. However, I couldn't shake off the images of Rita and Henry being intimate right in front of me. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I was furious with Rita, but the fact that Henry had acted overly friendly with me made me even more enraged. I couldn't help but wonder if they were already involved or about to be when I first met him. That made me really want to know who he really was. So, I decided to hire a private investigator, PI, to run a background check on Henry. I had this gut feeling from the moment I met him that he was bad news, and I was upset with myself for not trusting my instincts. The PI, who happened to be a friend from my workplace, got back to me after a week with a file on Henry. It had mugshots of him from many years ago. I've had my share of trouble in the past and done some regrettable things in my life. I've known people who intentionally did terrible things, especially under the influence of pills and substances. But Henry had a long list of crimes, including several DWIs, reckless driving, receiving stolen goods, and even breaking and entering. His record also showed pills arrests, and they got worse as you went down the list. I found out he had been out on early probation for about 2 years after serving a 10-year prison sentence. When I saw the charges for sexual offenses, I was utterly disgusted. Rita's betrayal already hurt, but knowing she might have put me at risk was even worse. The thought of what diseases that felon might have as a physical offender, and from his time in prison, made me feel physically sick. I doubted Rita had any clue about who she was involved with behind my back. She had a naive and trusting nature that had caused her problems before, but nothing like this. Anyone who knew about Henry's record would have seen him as a vile creature. He should have never been let out of prison. But I had to focus on my mom's funeral and pull myself together. After the funeral, when everyone had left and I was exhausted and emotionally drained, I tried to sleep. Then Rita called, not knowing that my mom had passed or that I knew about what she had been doing. Before my discovery, she had been texting and calling me much less. When she called, I tried my best to sound happy to hear from her, even though I didn't let on that anything had changed with my mom's condition, or that I knew about her and Henry, or what I had found out about him. I just let her do most of the talking and pretended to believe every lie she told, acting as if I totally believed her and appreciated her false sympathy when she said she missed me. When we said goodbye, I lied and told her the same. But to be honest, I wouldn't have cared at all if she was gone at that moment. I got a few weeks off from work for bereavement. I knew things with Rita were completely done, but part of me struggled with how cruelly she had treated me, whether it was intentional or not. On one hand, I was glad to know the truth about her and Henry before any more lies and betrayal could happen. But on the other hand, I felt that what they both did to me at a time when I was already struggling was just plain wrong. I wanted revenge. I wanted to ruin both of their lives without them ever knowing I had anything to do with it. So, I called my Human Resources Department and filled out the necessary paperwork for FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, to stay out of work longer than the given 2 weeks. Honestly, I had no reason to worry about getting fired, but I took the legal route and had enough money saved up to cover my bills for at least half a year, maybe more if needed. I was determined to get my revenge on Henry, and it turned out to be quite easy. Since he was on parole and a felon, even a minor charge could send him back to prison to finish his original sentence. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to hit him hard with new charges that would keep him locked up for a long time, never to see freedom again. I had met Henry's parole officer on several occasions, and she knew me well enough that if I had called her, she would have looked into his felonies. With his record, I knew he'd have a tough time finding a job, and I doubted he was working something legal to afford a new Buick and insurance. So, I parked my car, which Rita wouldn't recognize, down the street from her place. When I saw Henry's Buick in her driveway, I waited in silence until around 2 a.m. when I heard him start his engine and leave. I followed him casually, making sure not to raise any suspicions. It was time for me to do some digging of my own while keeping a reasonable distance. The signal led me to a rundown house in a below-average part of Rita's town. His car was already parked, and he had gone inside. I jotted down the license plate number and parked my car down the street. I took a few hours nap while keeping an eye on his house, but there was no activity. I woke up around 8 in the morning, got out of the car and grabbed some breakfast. As the day went on, it became clear whether Henry had a big group of friends who came and went quickly, or if he was dealing with highly obsessive substances like coke, junk, or ice. After a while, many customers returned for more pills, making it obvious he was selling. I took photos of the cars that stopped by and shot some videos to document the activity. I went back each day around the same time to keep track of his ongoing dealings. I also watched each night at around 6 p.m. when Rita finished work. Henry would leave his house, and I followed him to see him meet Rita at a restaurant or head straight to her place. I seriously doubted she had ever been to his house, at least not that specific one. I had gathered enough evidence to turn into the local police, but I wanted to document his activities for one more day since I knew he hadn't restocked his pills to sell on that last day. I kept watch around 3 p.m., and I noticed that people had stopped coming by, which was unusual. I sat there and watched for a while. About 30 minutes later, a big black Cadillac Escalade pulled into Henry's driveway. Usually, only one person would get out of a car to go inside his house. But this time, I saw 3 large guys come out of the Escalade and help a middle-aged man inside. They stayed in Henry's house for over 2 hours, which was unusual. I was pretty sure that middle-aged man was the source of the pills Henry was selling. I drove by and took a picture of the Escalade's license plate when it was parked at home. Later, I downloaded all the photos and videos I had taken of Henry's activities onto my computer. Then, I made a detailed report documenting what I had observed over the 4 days. Once I was done, I printed out 38 pages of photos showing people going to Henry's door to buy pills. I saved all the video recordings on a SIM card and put it in a small plastic box to keep it safe. I knew I had enough evidence to convince the police about what Henry was up to. I had timestamps on each photo and video, making it real and admissible in court. But I wanted to make sure the police took serious action against him. So, the next morning, I went to the police station in Rita's town and asked to speak with someone in their pills division calmly. A cop in uniform came out from the office and we shook hands. I handed him one of my business cards, and he looked at it for a few seconds, probably recognizing the clout it carried, even if I hadn't passed the bar exam yet. I told him I had some info he might want to see. He seemed happy and led me to a conference room, where we chatted about people we both knew. But then I slid a folder with paperwork and the SIM card across the table to him. The first page had Henry's name, date of birth, criminal record, and parole officer listed. The detective looked at the photos and stayed quiet. His expression said it all. He knew this information could easily lead to an arrest warrant for Henry. But he probably also saw the opportunity to get a lot of narcotics off the street, possible promotions, and other benefits. He thanked me for the evidence and placed the folder back on the table. Then he asked if I'd be willing to testify. I told him the evidence was so damning that I probably wouldn't need to. He smiled and casually asked if there was anything else I needed. I explained that I felt Henry had been released from prison too soon and clearly hadn't been rehabilitated. He deserved to go back to jail for much longer. The detective agreed, but wanted to know what I wanted in return for the information. I showed him a photo of the black Escalade with the license plate number and told him to write it down for himself. I mentioned that the owner of the Escalade might be an even bigger pills dealer. I emphasized that I wanted to stay anonymous in all police and court reports, and he agreed. Then, I came up with a little white lie, saying my law firm was representing someone who might have been set up by the owner of the Escalade. He knew I could have asked one of the lawyers at my firm for the info, but they don't like to use their favors often. The detective thought about it for a moment, realizing I had given him another lead to follow. I had done more detective work in 5 days than his whole team in months, and he was happy to agree. A short while later, he handed me a printout with the owner's name and address from the tag. I put it in my pocket, thanked the detective, and we chatted a bit more about sports and cars before I left. I drove home knowing that a judge would soon be signing an arrest warrant for that scumbag Henry. After a few days, I kept to myself, checking the arrest reports in the local paper online. One morning, there it was, a photo of a bewildered and confused Henry getting arrested, led away in handcuffs. If no stupid errors were made to get him off on some technicality, he'd be serving his original sentence plus many more years. But there was always a chance he could find a good lawyer to reduce the charges or find a loophole to get away with it. I couldn't let that happen, and I wouldn't. I hadn't been driving for more than 10 minutes when my phone rang, and the caller ID showed it was Rita calling. I tried to act surprised and happy to hear from her, without even giving a friendly greeting. She asked how I didn't let her know that my mother had passed away, as she had seen the obituary in the newspaper. I replied that it seemed like she was busy enjoying life, and I didn't want to burden her with my grief. I quickly asked her why she hadn't been texting or calling as much lately, and she changed the subject, asking to see me. I did my best to act happy to hear from her, and told her that I missed her. I asked if she could meet me for dinner at our favorite restaurant in town, and she readily agreed since Henry was out of the picture. She was happy to have me back and filling the void. I went to dinner with her, smiling and giving her a long hug, trying my best to hide the urge to break her spine for what she did. I was surprised she didn't say anything when I avoided kissing her. I guess she assumed my grief made me less interested in romance. I knew exactly where her mouth had been, and I didn't want any of Henry's prison germs on me. We sat at the bar and ordered drinks from our favorite bartender who knew us as a couple. I excused myself to the restroom and sent a message on my phone, asking the bartender to make my drinks without alcohol and hers double. When I returned, I sat next to Rita, discussing drinks and acting as if I was checking out a recipe for a special drink. The bartender came over and asked if we were ready for another round. I showed him the message, saying we were celebrating after not seeing each other for a while. He read it, smiled, and agreed to make the special drink I requested. I'm sure both the bartender and Rita assumed she could drink as much as she wanted, and that she'd be going home with me afterward. I had a different agenda in mind, and acted like her drink was strong. I pretended mine hardly had any alcohol in it. We kept ordering more drinks, and Rita started commenting on how drunk she felt. I acted surprised, saying I barely felt a buzz. After a few hours, I paid for everything with a generous tip. As we left the restaurant, I faked an important phone call and said I had to rush back to my town for work. The next morning, I asked Rita to wait for me at her house while I ran a quick errand. I watched her drive off, and then I called the police, telling them I saw a drunk driver leaving the restaurant. I urged them to act quickly, knowing she would be pulled over for a DWI. I drove to Rita's house, about a mile away from where she got pulled over. I saw the blue lights ahead and knew my plan was working. What neither she nor I knew was that Henry had been using her car to distribute pills to low-level dealers under him. They did the usual search of Rita's car and found a stash of coke hidden under the back seat. I never intended to get her arrested for pills possession and selling, but the fact that she had given me her spare car key the same night she gave me her spare house key made me realize I could have easily messed up my life as well. At that time, she had no clue that I already knew about her cheating, which later became public knowledge. Later that day, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Rita crying and trying to tell me something. I managed to calm her down and listened to what she had to say. She told me she was in jail, and I genuinely acted surprised, asking her what happened. When she revealed it was for pills-related charges, I was shocked. She asked me to help her get out and post bail. I explained that since my mom had passed away, I couldn't risk using any of my property for collateral due to legal issues. Even though I could have used my own home as collateral, I saw her pills charges as a consequence of her actions, and she had already caused enough damage to my life. The charges for possession of coke with intent to distribute meant she would be facing mandatory time. After all the pain she caused me, and the person she betrayed me with, I couldn't help but feel a part of her deserved the consequences coming her way. I attended her arraignment, trying to blend in and not be noticed as she walked into the courtroom. But she saw me. I put on a look of confusion, as if I had no idea why she would be arrested for such a crime. Deep down, I knew exactly why, but I had to act like I had no clue. She tried to explain to the judge that her boyfriend had been caught dealing pills just a few days before, so it must have been his. The judge wasn't buying it. She turned to look at me, filled with shame and tears in her eyes, knowing that I knew about her infidelity. I shook my head in disgust as they took her away. She knew there was no point in ever trying to contact me again. They set a high bond for both her and Henry, but he decided to plead guilty and skip the trial, hoping for some leniency. He didn't get any. Rita's trial happened a few weeks later, and she took a plea deal. She got 4 years with a possibility of parole in 3, but her career was ruined once she got out. And I couldn't care less. They messed with the worst person they could have crossed at the absolute worst time to do so.
Don't forget to subscribe, like, and click on the little bell icon for notifications of new stories.